So I think it was lesson 12. We talked about what the Buddhists referred to as the four immeasurables. So Maitri, Karuna, and so on. And what I said at that time was that these are the natural response of a pure heart to, when that heart is presented with these beings in different conditions. So if you're with somebody who's happy, you feel friendliness. Someone who is suffering, you'll naturally feel compassion. This is the response of a pure heart, just naturally. If they're virtuous, you'll feel this goodwill, this happiness, empathetic joy towards them. And if they're wicked, you'll feel upeksha, just dispassion. It won't really interest you. It won't touch you. So you'll have that just naturally. So there's one other situation that we haven't talked about in depth, and that is, well, first of all, those four have to do with finite beings, either on this earthly plane or any other plane. But finite beings, that's the response of a pure heart to the varying conditions of finite beings. But the other case is when you're presented with the divine. You experience God, you experience the divine. Are you going to feel, these same feelings in that case? Probably not. The natural feeling that comes when you're presented with the divine, it's in a different category, and it's devotion. So that's the natural response of a pure heart when you're presented with the divine. Now, everybody who's taken this class has learned tremendously powerful and effective techniques that sooner or later are going to bring you to that experience of the divine. If you haven't already experienced it, then it's going to come for sure. And so this will be the natural response that you'll feel is just devotion. Now, kind of diving a little bit more into devotion, you can actually, everybody has the capacity for devotion. There's this concept that is sort of popular, that these different paths to enlightenment, bhakti, is the path of devotion, jnana, the path of knowledge, Raja Yoga, and so on, mantra yoga, all these different paths are suited to different people of different dispositions. Like one person more will be attracted to bhakti because they have that leaning, that tendency. Another person will be more intellectual, so they're attracted to the path of knowledge, and so on. Some love the different yogic practices, so they're attracted to that, or some tantric practices. So this is a concept. However, it's actually not entirely true. You might be initially attracted to one or another path because of your predisposition, but every human being has all these faculties. Every human being has a heart. They have feelings. Every human being can transcend. They can practice meditation. They can do mantra meditation. They can do yoga. Maybe not excel at it, but the yoga philosophy, the different, samyama, all the different practices of Raja Yoga, that anybody has that capacity, because everyone has a mind, so they can think at a conscious thinking level, they can think at a subtler level, they can think at a subtler level, and they can transcend and be in samadhi. So everyone has that capacity. So everyone has an intellect. If they continue on the path, whatever path they're on, eventually that intellect will be illumined, and they'll be able to perceive the truth, cognize the truth, realize the self. So every human being has all these faculties. And every human being can embody all these different paths to some degree or another. And they may have some leanings one way or another, but it doesn't mean that they're exclusively on that path. We all have all of these capacities. That's the important thing. And when it comes to devotion, even in ignorance, even right now, everybody has the capacity for some degree of devotion, and it can show up in different ways. Like somebody could be devoted to their child, they can be devoted to their partner, they can be devoted to their car, to their job, to earning money. Somehow they have that. It's sort of the spark behind the desire that can drive it to fulfillment. And in some way, many times, they'll be perceiving some little glimmer of what is higher in that thing, some glimmer of the divine in their partner, some glimmer of the divine in, maybe they're devoted to a sport, to competing in that sport, to excelling in that sport, and they feel that thrill of being action that is fully engaged, and like a kind of perfection in that action, taking it to whatever degree they can towards perfection. So there's that kind of devotion. But and then also devotion to the divine. However, as long as we're in ignorance, we only have so much consciousness, right? So maybe we have 10% of our consciousness developed. That means the mind is distracted, it's broken in some way, it's on, it's off again. It's not fully coherent. And so the degree of devotion is somewhat weakened because of that. So it's really in and thereabouts cosmic consciousness. Like as you get close to cosmic consciousness, that devotion really starts to become significant, because then the wholeness of your consciousness, it's intact. This wholeness is intact, this immense unbounded consciousness. So it's no longer broken. So your attention and your focus, your devotion to whatever that goal is supported by this infinite consciousness. So it's a much more powerful state of mind and heart. And so it's much more significant. And in fact, like I said before, you could be devoted to many different things. Now, some things, like if you're devoted to money, there's not a lot of, compared to like being devoted to your beloved partner, there's not a lot of sweetness in that. Or being devoted to a child. Like there's some, to protecting and caring for a child, there's sweetness in that. Whereas being devoted to your car, to your job, not a whole lot of sweetness usually. There may be some other cases you're devoted to saving the planet, to some worthy cause. And so that also can stimulate this devotion. And maybe there's some real juice to that as well. But when you get to cosmic consciousness, there's this kind of that you have that infinite consciousness, which contrasts with everything on the outside, which pales by comparison. So there's a kind of detachment from everything. And at that point, you're also, by that time, you've gotten some strong hints of the divine, some strong glimmers of the divine. So now your attention will go towards the divine. And that actually is the only thing that really has the power to captivate your focus and attention. So that's why cosmic consciousness is when devotion becomes significant, because you have that wholeness of awareness. And now the divine is the one thing that is captivating. And as you start to proceed from that point on the path of devotion, it's as if the divine and that path of devotion becomes more fulfilling than the infinite self. Like it's more fulfilling than that because it involves the heart. Whereas consciousness is transcendent. It's completely transcendent of mind and heart. And it's full, it's absolutely fullness. So you may feel absolutely full, but there's something flat about it. So devotion now becomes the most important thing and the most enchanting thing. So you might wonder, okay, what is this course is about? Brahmajnana, the knowledge of Brahman, enlightenment. So what does this have to do with that? So actually, devotion is the basis, is the path to God consciousness. And God consciousness is actually the foundation of enlightenment. If you try to get enlightened without passing through this full experience of the divine and devotion to the divine, it's like there's some important ingredient that's missing. Like enlightenment without the light of God is not the same. It's like trying to make a cake without sugar or without some kind of sweetener. It just doesn't quite cut it. you know. And so you've that's how important devotion is as a foundation to unity consciousness. The light of the self needs to have that fragrance and extra glow of the light of God. This may not seem relevant to you right now. Maybe this seems like it's far off. I don't believe it is that far off for anyone in this course. With these practices, you're quickly coming on to that. I mean, if you think about where you were, 6 months ago, how much your meditation has deepened in just these few months. It's like with the power of these practices, you're moving at a pace that would have taken years without this, with just the simple meditation or something. So the thing is, even now we can start to put some attention on starting to develop devotion to some degree. I've mentioned the idea of being initiated into an advanced mantra. So an advanced personal mantra is something that starts to sharpen your perception of the subtle levels of creation, starting with the subtle levels of the mind, but then that's the same as the subtle levels of everything out here. So, and those finer levels of perception are in the direction of the divine. You have to fine tune your perception to see that living presence of the divine everywhere. So this is something that brings those glimmers of divinity, accelerates the progress towards that. The funny thing is, I'll tell you, I'm aware that some people may kind of look down their nose a little bit at devotion, because especially if you've grown in that tradition of some, Raja yoga, these wonderful practices, you may think, oh, that's for people who don't devotion, that's for people who don't know these subtle, amazing practices. Or if you're a jnani, then you may likely think, nothing's better than knowledge. Like the path of jhana is the best. And you could look down your nose at devotion. And the truth is, there was a time when I felt that way. And so I know how that is, believe me. But as you actually start to get to the point where you are experiencing the divine, then all those ideas melt away, because by that time, your heart has developed, it has purified. And when you start to experience the divine, there's just no way you can do anything about it. You're going to feel devotion, and you're going to realize that there is no human experience more fulfilling than devotion, like supreme devotion, like, because that quality of feeling is the finest, most delicate, subtle expression of pure love that a human heart is capable of. And it's directed towards the most fulfilling possible target, which is our source, the source of this entire universe, the divine. And so there's nothing more satisfying. That's why in the various scriptures, there's often this sense of, well, it depends which scripture you're reading, but often they extol devotion that way. Like there's, I think in the Srimad Bhagavatam, there's a case where Veda Vyasa, who had, you know, written the Brahma Sutras and organized the Vedas, and he was just the embodiment of the whole Sanatana Dharma. I mean, all the Vedic knowledge was at his fingertips. He was fully enlightened. And yet, one day he's seeming to be not as radiant with joy as you would expect. And I think it was Krishna says to him, you know, what's wrong? And he goes, oh, I don't know. This is me paraphrasing. You know, he goes something like, I don't know, you know, just not the best day, you know. So, and then I think Krishna tells him, you've done all this wonderful work with the Vedas and the Ramasutras, but you haven't adequately sung the praises of the divine, you know, through the bhakti. So anyway, there's this idea like that. And of course, there's a debate in various schools, like what is the supreme state? Is it this, you know, pure bhakti, which is so fulfilling? Or is it jhana, where you see the self everywhere? And then, of course, you have cases where, like Shankara said, that even in enlightenment, you may imagine duality for the sake of devotion. Like, even though there's unity that's apparent, you may still imagine duality for the sake of devotion because it's so fulfilling. So I wanted to bring this out and give this picture so that we don't get closed off to that. You know, it's like somebody who just goes on the path of jhana, just that path of knowledge. It's like it's too dry, and it can be like you know, a tree that is growing but without all the proper fertilizer and all the proper conditions, so it's a little bit scraggly, you know. And so we want to have the fullness of everything, and for that fullness of everything, definitely devotion is an you know, wonderful ingredient. It's an absolutely critical fertilizer to your consciousness, so that you have the fullness of everything contained in your Brahman consciousness.